The concrete truck was pouring a footing across my roadside strip when I stepped between the survey flag and the HOA's welcome monument. Concrete filled a trench beneath 6-foot stone columns, while workers positioned bronze letters spelling Harbor Crest. HOA President Elaine Mercer stood beside the mixer and pointed toward the road. "This is our entrance. Get off HOA property." I did not touch the equipment or argue. I photographed the trench, the parcel stake, and the permit inside the contractor's windshield. Then I asked which deed gave Harbor Crest title to the 22-foot strip. Elaine smiled as if the question were beneath her. 10 minutes later, the county building inspector arrived for the scheduled footing check. He compared the permit sketch to the parcel number on my tax record, then stopped the pour. The permit covered the HOA's landscaped median, not the strip beneath their monument. That should have ended the morning. Instead, the foreman quietly showed me an email ordering him to proceed, although the owner authorization line was blank. The message came from Elaine, but it quoted a promise made by the original developer nearly 3 decades earlier. A promise, I would learn, that was never backed by ownership. Inspector Paul Avery photographed the permit card, the nearest utility flag, and a brass disc half buried under an excavator track. "That marker was upright yesterday," I told him. Paul crouched without touching it. He said the county could document the work and require a corrected permit package, but it could not decide who owned the ground. That depended on deeds, recorded plats, and a proper survey. He posted a red stop work notice and instructed the crew to secure the site without adding permanent construction. "My name is Owen Barrett. I ran a native plant nursery and knew what heavy equipment did to compacted soil, shallow irrigation lines, and drainage grades. The open footing crossed a grassy verge my family had maintained for decades. A crushed sprinkler head leaked into the trench, carrying gray slurry toward a row of young cedars. The trench cut across the narrow service lane I used to move soil, seedlings, and irrigation supplies between the road and my greenhouse. I recorded the site in one continuous video. Roy Bennett, the foreman, lowered his voice while Elaine argued with Paul near the mixer. Roy said his crew had followed the layout supplied by the HOA. When he requested the landowner's signature, Elaine told him the developer's original entrance plan was enough. Before leaving, Paul gave me the permit number and advised me to request the full application. Elaine watched from beside her SUV. She did not repeat her order for me to leave. She told Roy to cover the trench and said the board's attorney would handle me. By noon, the machines were silent. 2 unfinished columns stood above a foundation crossing my grass like a scar. The stop work notice fluttered beside bronze letters still wrapped in plastic. I enlarged the permit photograph on my phone. Its parcel number ended in 418. My property tax statement ended in 427. A permit error was fixable. A missing deed was not. The mistake was visible. What I did not know was whether Elaine had made it, or whether someone had warned her before the first shovel entered my land. At my kitchen table, I opened my tax statement, my father's property folder, and the permit number Paul had given me. Our house stood behind a nursery on 3.8 acres, owned by my family before Harbor Crest appeared. My father, Charles Barrett, bought the tract when the land south of us was scrub pine and pasture. He built our first greenhouse from salvaged windows and laid the irrigation lines himself. The disputed ground looked insignificant on a map. It was a strip 22 feet wide and 186 feet long, running beside the north edge of the Harbor Crest entrance road. On the ground, it did 4 jobs. A shallow swale carried stormwater away from my lower greenhouse. A buried irrigation main fed 3 growing beds. The packed service lane let me move soil and plants between the county road and the nursery. Along its outer edge stood 9 coastal cedars my father had planted as a windbreak. Harbor Crest owned the paved entrance, landscaped median, and a tract on the south side. It paid no taxes on my northern verge. My tax statements placed the strip inside parcel 427, and my deed followed the boundary Dad had shown me as a teenager. Dad had told me the developer wanted the frontage before the first Harbor Crest house was completed. A company representative offered to buy enough land for a larger entrance, but the proposed access would cross our irrigation system. Dad refused. I remembered the story, but memory was not a recorded instrument, and I could not find the offer in his folder. The next morning, I received a certified letter from Elaine on Harbor Crest letterhead. It called the strip Dedicated Community Entrance Property and demanded that I allow the contractor to resume work. The letter said the HOA would seek delay costs if I interfered with a properly approved improvement. I read it twice. Then I photographed the envelope, scanned every page, and saved the files with the construction images. Attached was a color site plan showing the entrance in green. The monument sat directly over my verge. Small print identified the drawing as a development concept predating the recorded subdivision plat. It carried no official recorder's stamp, deed reference, or parcel number for the strip. The paper showed what someone wanted to build, not how they acquired the ground. I checked the county's online parcel viewer as a clue, not proof. Its lines placed the monument near parcel 427, but the map was too imprecise to settle a foundation. What mattered was that the permit listed parcel 418, the HOA median, while the excavation stood several yards north. I requested the permit application, inspection notes, approved site sketch, and ownership authorization from the county. I also replied to Elaine by email. I did not accuse her of fraud or threaten to tear anything down. I stated that I disputed the HOA's claim, denied permission to enter, and expected the stop work order to be respected while title and location were reviewed. Her answer arrived 11 minutes later. The developer dedicated that entrance to Harbor Crest, and your family has accepted it for decades. That sentence bothered me more than the threat about delay costs. My family had mowed the verge, repaired the irrigation, cleared the swale after storms, and replaced cedars after a salt-heavy winter. If the HOA now described that work as acceptance of its ownership, I needed someone who could distinguish a maintained landscape from a legally transferred parcel. I called Maya Chen, a certified land surveyor who had located a boundary for another nursery owner after a road-widening dispute. I sent her my deed, the tax map, the HOA plan, and the permit sketch. She warned me that she could locate the deed description on the ground, but could not decide the legal meaning of historic documents. For that, I might also need a title professional and an attorney. Maya arrived 2 days later with a tripod, a data collector, and copies of recorded control points outside the disturbed area. She began at the county road, then worked toward the unfinished columns in measured steps. Near the trench, she stopped beside the brass disc Paul had photographed. She brushed loose soil away without moving it, and looked at the deep excavator tread pressed across its edge. "This wasn't where the monument was supposed to go," she said. "But I need to find out whether this marker is still where it was supposed to be." Maya did not trust the damaged brass disc by itself. She treated it as one piece of evidence among several, beginning with 2 recorded control points beyond the construction area and a concrete monument near the back of my nursery. Her receiver stood above each point while she checked distances, bearings, and elevation against the legal description attached to my deed. For most of the morning, I carried stakes and kept customers away from her line of sight. Maya worked without offering conclusions. She measured the paved entrance, the HOA median, the northern verge, and both unfinished columns. When she finally transferred the field data to her tablet, a clean boundary line appeared several yards south of the line shown on the contractor's concept plan. The primary footing lay entirely inside parcel 427. Part of the second column crossed the same line. The excavator had not merely strayed a few inches, it had entered the 22-foot strip and disturbed the corner marker that helped identify it. A salt breeze moved through the cedars while Maya photographed the crushed sprinkler head and concrete residue, linking the measured encroachment to the damage I had recorded on construction day. Maya marked temporary reference points outside the damaged soil and photographed each one. She explained that her survey could locate the deed description and document the construction, but it would not answer whether an older conveyance had changed ownership. We needed to examine the recorded chain. I took her preliminary field sketch to Nora Whitfield, a title examiner who worked from a quiet office above a hardware store. Nora began with my father's acquisition deed, then traced every recorded instrument affecting our parcel. She also pulled the deed through which Bayshore Development had acquired the surrounding property before creating Harbor Crest. The developer's legal description approached my family's frontage and then turned east before reaching it. The 22 by 186-foot strip remained inside the Barrett tract. Later deeds transferred subdivision lots, roads, the landscaped median, and identified common areas to Harbor Crest. None transferred my northern verge. The recorded subdivision plat told the same story. It dedicated the entrance road and labeled the median, but its boundary stopped at my property line. The green shape on Elaine's concept drawing extended farther than the recorded plat. Nora found no deed, easement, boundary agreement, or separate dedication bridging that gap. Design intent isn't title, she said. Someone still had to convey the land. The absence of a recorded transfer was important, but Nora wanted to know why my father remembered a purchase offer. She searched the index under the developer's former corporate names, then contacted the title company that had handled its original acquisition. The company no longer operated locally, but its archived closing files had been transferred to a regional records custodian. 4 days later, Nora called me back. On her desk sat a scanned letter dated 28 years earlier. Bayshore Development had offered Charles Barrett a fixed price for the frontage strip, subject to approval of an irrigation relocation plan. My father had written, "Declined" across the first page and initialed it. A follow-up letter from the developer acknowledged his decision and stated that the entrance design would be revised. No deed had been prepared. No money had changed hands. No closing had occurred. That file did more than support my memory. It showed that Bayshore knew the strip belonged to my father when it acquired the surrounding land. Whatever informal promise Elaine's email mentioned, the developer could not later give Harbor Crest property it had failed to buy. Nora prepared a chain of title report, identifying each instrument she had examined and the archive source for the rejected offer. Maya completed her certified survey using the surviving monuments, recorded calls, and field measurements. Her final drawing placed both the concrete footing and damaged irrigation line on my side of the boundary. I brought both reports to Priya Desai, a property attorney recommended by Nora. Priya reviewed the documents before discussing strategy. She warned me that the HOA might argue dedication, acquiescence, or some other theory based on the entrance appearance and historic maintenance. A strong deed and survey did not prevent them from making those arguments. It gave us a disciplined way to answer them. Priya sent Harbor Crest a cease and desist letter that afternoon. It enclosed the survey, identified my recorded deed, denied permission for further entry, and demanded preservation of emails, meeting minutes, contracts, permits, plans, and communications with the original developer. It also requested a written plan to secure the unfinished structure without expanding it. Elaine did not answer Priya. At 7 the next morning, 2 white contractor trucks stopped beside the monument. Workers unloaded steel braces, orange fencing, a portable pump, and enough lumber to suggest that Harbor Crest had chosen action before explanation. I walked down the service lane as the trucks arrived. Roy Bennett met me beside the first truck and held up his hands. He said his crew had been hired to prevent the unfinished columns from shifting, not to resume the monument. The equipment on my grass still belonged to people who had received Priya's notice. I called her before anyone crossed the fencing. Priya spoke with the contractor's supervisor and Paul Avery. They agreed on a narrow safety plan. Steel braces could be anchored to temporary concrete blocks placed on the paved HOA entrance. The trench could be covered, and water could be pumped into a drainage inlet. No new footing, masonry, or excavation would be allowed. The temporary measures came before 3 days of coastal rain. Water ran down the Harbor Crest Road, reached the broken swale, and spread across my service lane. The portable pump protected the exposed footing, but did little for my nursery. Mud pooled around the lower greenhouse, and the damaged irrigation line lost pressure when I opened the growing bed valves. I moved trays of young sea oats and wax myrtle by hand, because my utility cart could not cross the saturated lane. 2 cedar roots remained coated with concrete residue. By morning, I had canceled a delivery and lost plants to uneven watering. Elaine used the weather to change the public story. An email sent to Harbor Crest residents described the monument as a safety improvement delayed by an adjacent owner's unsupported boundary demand. It warned that the unfinished entrance created costs for every household. The message did not mention Maya's survey, the permit mismatch, or the rejected purchase offer. Some residents drove past slowly and photographed me working. One man stopped beside the nursery gate and accused me of trying to take the HOA's entrance. I gave him a copy of the survey cover page and told him the court records would eventually be public if the matter reached that point. I did not debate him beside the road. The pressure was unpleasant, but it also produced witnesses. A Harbor Crest homeowner named Dana Ruiz emailed me after reading Elaine's message. Dana served on the landscape committee and remembered board discussions about the monument site. She said 2 directors had asked for a title search months earlier, but Elaine called it an unnecessary delay. Roy provided something more concrete. His company's project packet contained the concept plan, structural drawings, Elaine's approval emails, and the blank owner authorization form he had shown me on construction day. One email from Roy asked whether the northern footing required a separate landowner signature. Elaine replied that the developer's historic plan established HOA control and ordered him to keep the project on schedule. The packet also contained a change order note describing the location as North Entrance Strip, ownership confirmation pending. Roy had not written that phrase. It had been carried forward from an earlier engineering review supplied by the HOA. Priya added the packet and Dana's account to our preservation file. She requested the board minutes through Harbor Crest's attorney. The first production was missing attachments, but the written minutes were enough to expose a pattern. 6 months before construction, the board had listed an unresolved entrance parcel under project risks. The treasurer, Martin Cole, had moved to obtain a title report. Elaine postponed the motion and promised that the developer's archived plan would satisfy the contractor. I called Martin only after Priya obtained permission from Harbor Crest's council. He sounded exhausted. He said Elaine wanted the monument completed before the neighborhood's annual property tour because local brokers had criticized the aging entrance. The board approved the project budget, but Martin believed a title search would occur before ground was broken. When he asked about it again, Elaine told him the issue had been cleared. Nothing in the minutes showed that it had. Meanwhile, I hired an irrigation specialist to pressure test the damaged main. He traced the loss to a cracked coupling beside the footing and estimated the repair, including excavation and replacement bedding. A drainage engineer documented how the open trench interrupted the swale and directed runoff toward the greenhouse. A landscape contractor counted the damaged stock, tested the compacted soil, and priced restoration of the lane and cedars. The numbers transformed inconvenience into measurable harm. I preserved canceled delivery records, nursery invoices, photographs, moisture readings, and daily notes showing where water had stood. I did not inflate the claim with every muddy boot or lost hour. Priya wanted costs we could support, not anger translated into a large demand. Harbor Crest's attorney finally answered the cease and desist letter. The response rejected Maya's conclusions, claimed the HOA had long-standing rights based on the development plan and historic entrance maintenance, and reserved every available defense. It proposed a meeting but refused to acknowledge my ownership. Before that meeting occurred, new orange markings appeared across the grass beside the footing. Roy confirmed that they came from a revised monument layout Elaine had asked him to price. The columns would shift slightly south, but the proposed foundation still crossed Maya's surveyed line. That afternoon, Elaine sent the board a notice announcing that construction would resume once the revised permit was approved. Priya read the notice, closed the folder, and looked at me across her desk. "We've given them the evidence," she said. "Now we need an order they cannot vote around." Priya filed the complaint before Harbor Crest could submit its revised permit. We sought a declaration that I owned the 22 by 186-foot strip, quiet title against the HOA, proven trespass and property damages, and temporary and permanent orders barring construction or unauthorized entry. The filing did not treat Maya's survey as a magic answer. Priya attached my recorded deed, the developer's acquisition deed, the subdivision plat, Nora's chain of title report, the rejected purchase correspondence, the permit discrepancy, construction photographs, and Elaine's written claim. Maya's survey connected those records to the ground. Together, they formed a chain. Harbor Crest denied trespass and argued the development plan, entrance appearance, and decades of use supported implied dedication or justified reliance. Its attorney said my family had allowed HOA landscaping without objection. We answered with maintenance invoices, nursery photographs, irrigation records, and images of Dad working along the verge. Harbor Crest sometimes trimmed near the road after mowing its median, but it had never placed a permanent structure on the strip. I objected on the first morning I discovered excavation. At the temporary relief hearing, the judge made clear that she was not deciding final title. She focused on preserving the property and preventing harm. Harbor Crest could maintain the safety braces under the approved stabilization plan, but it could not add foundations, masonry, signs, utilities, or landscaping inside the disputed area. Both sides had to preserve records. The revised construction plan stopped there. That order gave us time, not victory. Discovery began with document requests and written questions. The HOA produced meeting minutes, project bids, invoices, structural drawings, resident emails, insurance communications, and several versions of the entrance plan. Priya compared each production against the preservation request and the contractor packet. Missing attachments appeared only after she identified their file names in forwarded email chains. One attachment was the engineering note Roy's packet had quoted. It marked the northern strip as ownership confirmation pending and recommended verifying the parcel before final design. Another was Martin Cole's proposed motion for a title search. Elaine had postponed it, then circulated a revised project schedule that listed title review as administratively resolved. No report or attorney opinion supported that entry. Roy gave sworn testimony about the blank authorization form and Elaine's direction to proceed. He did not claim to know who owned the land. He explained that contractors rely on clients to secure site rights and that he had raised the issue when the parcel numbers differed. His testimony authenticated the emails without turning him into a boundary expert. Nora located Lydia Shaw, a retired closing coordinator who had worked on Bayshore Development's acquisition. Lydia recognized the archived file structure, correspondence codes, and signatures. She testified that Charles Barrett rejected the purchase offer and that the proposed transaction never reached deed preparation or closing. The developer adjusted other portions of its acquisition afterward, but the Barrett strip remained outside the land it bought. Elaine's deposition lasted most of a day. She acknowledged receiving questions from Martin and another director before construction. She said she relied on the concept plan, the entrance appearance, and an old developer letter describing the monument as a future community feature. When Priya asked for the deed conveying the site, Elaine pointed to the same materials we had already reviewed. There was no deed. The testimony divided the board. Martin and two directors retained separate advice concerning their duties and supplied the missing attachments through HOA counsel. They did not join my side, but they stopped supporting Elaine's claim that the title issue had been cleared. Resident messages also changed as excerpts from the court filings became available. The angry roadside confrontations faded. Our damages file became equally specific. The irrigation specialist priced the cracked coupling and replacement bedding. The drainage engineer calculated the work needed to restore the swale after monument removal. The landscape contractor valued compacted soil remediation, damaged plants, cedar treatment, and service lane restoration. I documented the canceled delivery and limited period of lost access. Survey and title expenses were supported by invoices. Priya removed items that could not be traced directly to the encroachment. The supported total reached $34,850, excluding whatever Harbor Crest would spend removing and relocating its own structure. The court ordered mediation before setting the final trial. I offered the HOA controlled access to remove the footing and restore my property, followed by a recorded boundary acknowledgement and permanent restriction against unauthorized entry. Harbor Crest proposed leaving the monument in place under a perpetual license with a small annual payment. I refused. A license would preserve the structure that had broken my irrigation and blocked my service lane. More importantly, Elaine demanded that the HOA retain permanent control of the site. She treated payment as a way to purchase rights my father had already refused to sell. The mediator moved between rooms for 5 hours. Martin supported removal if the costs could be managed through existing reserves, but Elaine would not authorize an agreement recognizing my ownership. The session ended without settlement. Over the next 6 weeks, Priya organized the trial record. The deed chains went into one binder, surveys and site evidence into another, and communications showing knowledge into a third. Witnesses prepared to explain only what their work allowed them to establish. Maya would locate the line. Nora would trace title. Lydia would authenticate the failed purchase. Paul would explain the permit mismatch. Roy would describe the construction authorization. I would establish possession, objection, and damage. On the morning of the bench trial, the courthouse windows reflected a pale strip of sunrise. Priya placed the 3 binders beside Maya's survey and turned to me. "No single page has to carry this case," she said. "The chain does." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. There was no jury and no last-minute document waiting to surprise anyone. The judge had our exhibits, temporary order, and months of filings. Each side now had to prove what those records meant. Harbor Crest's attorney described the entrance as a single feature used since the subdivision opened. He argued that the concept drawing, landscaped median, and years of mowing created a reasonable understanding that the northern verge belonged to the community. My family, he said, had watched without fencing the area or recording an objection. The argument was more careful than Elaine's roadside declaration. It did not claim the concept plan was a deed. It asked the court to infer a dedication or protect the HOA's reliance on the entrance historic appearance. When I testified, Priya began with possession. I explained how Dad maintained the swale and cedars, how irrigation served our nursery, and how the service lane reached the county road. She showed photographs, irrigation invoices, and tax statements identifying parcel 427. I described finding the concrete truck and objecting before the footing was finished. On cross-examination, the HOA's attorney asked why I had never installed a fence. I answered that the swale needed to remain open and a boundary did not become community property for lack of boards and wire. He asked about HOA grass trimming. I said workers occasionally overlap the edge, but no one had permanently occupied my strip before the monument. Maya explained her control points, the surviving rear monument, the deed calls, and field measurements. She did not rely on the displaced brass disc. Her certified survey placed the primary footing and part of the second column within the 22 by 186-foot strip. Independent reference points established the boundary. The HOA questioned tolerances and the age of the monuments. Maya acknowledged normal measurement limits and explained why none could move the line far enough to place the footing on parcel 418. Her answers remained technical and calm. The colored boundary on her final exhibit stayed well south of the concrete. Nora then walked through the recorded chain. My father's deed included the strip. Bayshore Development's acquisition description turned east before reaching it. Later instruments transferred roads, lots, the median, and specified common areas, but none included the northern verge. The recorded plat matched those instruments. The green concept plan did not. Lydia Shaw authenticated the purchase correspondence through file codes, signatures, the developer's offer, my father's rejection, and the follow-up promising a revised entrance design. HOA counsel suggested another arrangement might have granted permission. Lydia could address only her file. Nora answered the larger point. Her search found no later deed, dedication, easement, or recorded boundary agreement. The sequence mattered. Bayshore had tried to buy the strip because it knew the land was outside its acquisition. Charles refused. Nothing in the later record completed the missing transfer. Paul Avery limited his testimony to the permit. The application identified parcel 418, while the construction inspection placed work north of the approved sketch. That justified the stop work action. He did not tell the court who owned the strip. Roy was equally precise. He authenticated the blank owner authorization form, his email asking about the parcel difference, and Elaine's instruction to rely on the historic plan. He explained that the engineering note marked ownership confirmation as pending. He had proceeded because the HOA, as his client, represented that site control had been resolved. Elaine testified last for Harbor Crest. She described pressure to replace the aging entrance and said she believed the developer intended the entire area to serve the neighborhood. She relied on the concept plan, the old letter describing a future monument. and decades without a visible barrier. Priya asked who changed the project schedule to read administratively resolved. Elaine admitted she had. Priya asked what title report supported that change. Elaine said she believed formal review was unnecessary after comparing the archived plan with the entrance on the ground. She acknowledged Martin's motion for a title search and the engineering note, but said both reflected caution, not proof of another owner. Then Priya placed Elaine's certified letter beside my deed. The letter called the strip dedicated property and threatened delay costs. The deed showed the Barrett boundary. The question was not whether Elaine believed the monument improved Harbor Crest. It was what legal right allowed the HOA to put it there. After closing arguments, the judge took the matter under advisement and left the temporary order in place. We walked out without a verdict. The unfinished columns remained braced beside the entrance, while the nursery continued through another month of watering and deliveries. 19 days later, Priya called and asked me to come to her office. The written decision began with the chains of title. It found that the 22 by 186-foot strip remained within parcel 427 and that Bayshore Development had never acquired it. The recorded plat dedicated identified roads and common areas, but not my frontage. On the evidence presented, Harbor Crest had not established a dedication, easement, or other property right, allowing the monument to remain. The court emphasized that appearance alone and neighborhood expectation could not substitute for the missing transfer in this record. The court also found that occasional mowing near an open verge did not prove consent to a permanent 12-ton structure. I had objected immediately upon discovering the excavation. The concept drawing and future feature letter showed design intent, but neither conveyed land. The judgment quieted title in my favor and permanently prohibited Harbor Crest, its contractors, and anyone acting under its authority from entering the strip without permission, except to complete court-ordered removal and restoration. The HOA had 45 days to submit an engineered removal plan, take out the columns and footing, repair the irrigation and swale, relieve soil compaction, and restore the service lane. The court awarded $34,850 in documented damages. It covered irrigation repair, drainage work, damaged nursery stock, soil and cedar treatment, lost access, and supported survey and title expenses. Monument removal and relocation costs remained Harbor Crest's responsibility. I read the order twice. The words that mattered most were not the amount or even the injunction. They were the finding that Bayshore had never owned the strip. The entire project had rested on a promise drawn over land the developer failed to buy. Elaine did not speak to me outside the courthouse. Martin gave a brief nod, then walked toward the HOA's attorney. Priya reminded me that removal still required care. It could cause more damage if it became another uncontrolled construction project. 3 days later, Roy sent me a photograph from the entrance. His company had been asked to price removal under an engineer's supervision. Fresh survey stakes stood around the concrete, and the bronze Harbor Crest letters remained wrapped in weathered plastic. For the first time, every marker on that strip pointed toward taking the monument away. The removal plan arrived 12 days later. It required crews to detach the bronze letters, dismantle the masonry, saw the footing into sections, and lift each piece without widening the excavation. Maya marked the line before any machine returned. A structural engineer and Roy supervised while I documented from my service lane. This time, nobody told me to leave. The columns came down over 2 days. Their stone faces were stacked and moved to Harbor Crest's verified median. The footing took longer. Each section rose with wet sand clinging to it, exposing the cracked irrigation coupling and interrupted swale. An inspector checked the final excavation depth, and Maya photographed the exposed soil before the crew placed any replacement fill. Nothing would be covered until its condition was photographed and recorded. The HOA's contractors replaced the damaged pipe and tested it under pressure. They rebuilt the drainage grade, loosened compacted soil, and restored the service lane with the crushed shell material used before construction. Payment of the $34,850 judgment cleared shortly afterward. Harbor Crest chose not to discard the entire monument. It reused the stone and bronze letters for a smaller entrance structure centered on its median. The new foundation stayed inside parcel 418. From my driveway, I could see the sign without having any part of it on my land. Maya returned to verify the grade and reset the brass corner marker from the independent control points used in her survey. She filed the final reference information and gave me a copy. I installed a modest boundary post behind the marker so maintenance crews could see the line without disturbing it. Martin called a special meeting where directors reviewed the omitted engineering note, postponed title search motion, and cost of litigation and removal. Elaine defended her decision as protecting neighborhood values. The board removed her as president. She remained a Harbor Crest homeowner but no longer controlled the project or its explanation. The directors commissioned an independent review. New rules required a title report, parcel verification, and signed owner authorization before any project approached an external boundary. The policy could not undo the damage, but it placed the lesson in the HOA's records instead of another informal promise. I used nursery stock to restore the strip. Native grasses stabilized the swale, wax myrtle filled the disturbed edge, and 2 young coastal cedars replaced the trees that had not survived the concrete exposure. By autumn, my utility cart could travel the lane again, and water moved through the drainage channel instead of pooling beside the greenhouse. One afternoon, I found the rejected purchase letter in its new archival sleeve, beside the court order and Maya's survey. My father had preserved a single word, declined, and that word had mattered because deeds, measurements, photographs, and patient witnesses supported it. I put up no victory sign and did not block the relocated monument. I kept the swale clear, maintained the cedars, and let the boundary post do its quiet work. The first time I opened the repaired irrigation valve, water moved evenly through all 3 growing beds. Beyond them, the new cedars shifted in the coastal wind. The HOA's monument stood where it belonged, and the strip my father had refused to sell was still carrying water across our land. That was enough.